report. Plus, we'll take you to a summer camp like you've never seen before. Thanks for joining us on Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. Arizona's decision to step up immigration enforcement with a controversial new law has sparked protest across the country. And as Carlos Correa reports, Las Cruces is no exception.
Faith leaders in Las Cruces are gathering to send a strong message to local legislators.
Today we pray that
the new Arizona law, which makes illegal immigration a state crime and requires legal immigrants to carry proof of their status, is something Victor Montoya of Anthony, New Mexico thinks about every day.
To see a law that puts hate into now our communities, because that hate's now spilling into our lives, that's wrong.
The law gives local and state police the authority to check the immigration status of anyone they stop or arrest whom they suspect is in the country illegally.
You're seeing a profiling of a people based on their clothing, based on their skin color, which brings fear into communities.
As a member of CAFE, which stands for Comunidades en Acción y de Fe, is a faith-based community organization hosting educational forums throughout southern New Mexico.
We believe that the Arizona law is states taking matters into their own hands when the federal government hasn't been able to act or hasn't wanted to act on comprehensive immigration reform. This is what we're going to see happen throughout the country right now.
Organizers say 13 other states are currently looking at adopting a similar immigration law, which is why the group is pushing for the passage of the DREAM Act, a first step in a comprehensive immigration reform.
Enforcement only is good legislation, but it can't be the only legislation. You know, as a border town, we understand that we need to secure our borders, and we also need to legalize those who are here already and who are working hard.
The DREAM Act grants young people a path to citizenship if they enroll in a 2- or 4-year college, serve the military for a minimum of 2 years, and must have entered the country before the age of 16.
We do need to begin little laws like this to begin to help with this issue. The church supports, people, the movement of people, the free movement of people.
Organizers are encouraging people around the community to contact their local legislator in the hopes of passing the DREAM Act. For KRWG, I'm Carlos Correa.
In focus on Newsmakers, election 2010, and what an interesting election it is already shaping up to be. I'm very pleased to have with us today on Newsmakers to talk about this very interesting primary and our November election ahead, Dr. Jose Garcia of New Mexico State University. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Good to have you with us today, and I want to start off with, of course, the gubernatorial race. We have a candidate in southern New Mexico, Doñana District Attorney Susana Martinez, with the Republican nomination, a very big win for her on primary night, and she's going to take on, of course, Lieutenant Governor Diane Dennis.
That's right. It's going to be an interesting race. I guess it's probably too early to predict how it's going to go. I think the first 2 polls that came since then, I saw one of Survey USA that was taken maybe the eve of the poll, and then another one taken a day or 2 afterwards, indicates that it's probably within the margin of error, with Susana perhaps very slightly ahead at this point.
What would you say are the strengths and weaknesses for starting with Diane Dennis?
Well, of course, the strength is that she's been lieutenant governor, I think a fairly well-known figure. Everybody knows who she is, and I think she's established an identity as somebody who is caring and has worked on a variety of issues like children, mental health, and things like that. That's her strength. Her weakness, I think, is going to have to be that she was associated with what is now becoming a more and more unpopular administration, which is the Richardson administration. So I think a good deal of the debate that's going to ensue between now and November is going to focus exactly on what that relationship between her and the administration was all about. So that's probably on the weak side of that, and we'll see how well she defends what she's done. With Susana, I guess the strength there, of course, is that she has been a prosecutor at a time when I think the public is in a mood to prosecute given the scandals and corruption that we've had in the last few years, and I guess being a Hispanic person in the Republican Party is also kind of a novelty, but it probably is a strength overall. Weaknesses is that, of course, she's not very well known outside of the county, and will have to kind of establish her presence and establish some kind of identity for herself, and who knows where that's going to go, whether it's going to be policy oriented or following national policies or local policies, or whether she's going to focus on good management, or whether she's going to focus on the corruption of the past, or how she's going to handle that is a really interesting question. We're just going to have to wait and see what she does.
We've just gotten through the primary, and already this seems like it's going to be a bit of a nasty campaign. Rather than, here's what I'm going to do for New Mexico, it's here are the faults of the other candidate. Did that kind of surprise you that this early it's already getting that way?
Not really. I think there's a tendency to go negative. I'm not sure how long that's going to last. I don't think the public is really in a mood to be listening to negative ads unless they really do contribute to your knowledge of who that candidate is. I think people are willing to listen to that. But ultimately, I think this election is going to depend on the candidates stepping forward and saying what their plans are concretely for the state. We have problems in the state. We have unemployment at 8.7% right now, which is higher than normal, quite a bit higher. We have a national recession going on that is affecting the state. And in terms of the state finances, we are right now, as we speak, in a $50 million shortfall between now and the end of this month, which will have to be made up by gobbling up reserves, which means that next year we're not going to have as many reserves possible, which means if things continue going poorly, we're going to have to cut the budget more. So we have economic problems on the table, and I think the public really wants to know how these candidates expect to address those.
Do you see by that answer eventually fiscal issues really trumping all in this campaign? Because that's not what they've been talking about so far.
No, I think what they've been probably doing is just trying to establish an identity, trying out some themes, trying to maybe soften up the opponent a little bit.
But you think that's going to change? You think it's going to go toward economy and state budget?
Oh, it has to change.
It has to change.
Because the public will not put up with just simply negative stuff on. Ultimately, you, members of the press, are going to put the microphone in their mouths and say, look, what are you going to do about the problems? And so I think, yeah, fiscal stuff, what are you going to do about the economic situation is going to be a very important issue. But there's a second one, and which I think lingers throughout the whole campaign and will affect the outcome. New Mexico is not only in a fiscal crisis, in that the state budget has to be cut, the resources are not coming in, and we need to worry about employment. The state also is in something of a political crisis due to the fact that after all of the corruption, that's something that people want to see addressed. People just want to have some sense of what the candidates are going to do to prevent that from happening in the future. Ethics, I see that that's an issue that both candidates have tried to address. And it seems to me that we're in something of a crisis of confidence in government, because after all these scandals, people really are wondering whether they can trust government in state government. And we already have a crisis of confidence at the national level. All of the polls indicate in a bipartisan way, people are really fed up and sick and tired of Washington.
With that in mind, if after the economy and fiscal issues, corruption and ethics end up being, sort of issue number two, how much do you think that will play a role in the governor's race. You've already indicated that you believe that there will be, an attempt here, and we've already kind of heard that to some degree from the Martinez campaign to connect Dianne Dennish to Bill Richardson.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think that's inevitably going to come up. I think Susana Martinez is very likely to just be very forthcoming and just ask, what was your relationship? Where were you when all of this was happening? And where was your voice? And what did you do? And so I think we're really going to kind of explore that particular relationship. And I think the public is willing to explore that.
On the flip side, too, for Susana Martinez, already Lieutenant Governor Dennish has been talking about the fact that the Martinez campaign accepted nearly $500,000 from a Texas family, one family, the family that in part paid for these Swift boat ads against John Kerry when he ran for president. And that's how she framed the debate, saying she accepted Swift boat money. That's what Dianne Dennish said. What do you think about that? Will that play a role? I think people may have questions. First thing, why all this money from one family, nearly $500,000, nearly $500,000, and then what does that mean? What does that person get in return, so to speak?
It's hard to say what the impact of that's going to be politically. The background to that is as follows. There were efforts in the legislature to curtail the amount of money that people could give back down to the federal level of $5,000 per family. And that failed. It passed, but everybody this year was exempted. And so that won't kick in until 4 years from now. So both candidates are in the position that they can take large chunks of money. I think the public is not happy when they see large chunks of money coming in, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, from one single source. And I think the public is ready for some kind of campaign finance reform, but we're not going to see it this year. And we'll just have to wait to see what the fallout is on that.
One other question in terms of possible fallout, and that is Sarah Palin. Certainly her endorsement may have helped Susana Martinez in the primary, but does accepting an endorsement from a governor who left office midterm help someone who's running for governor?
Oh, endorsements always help. They don't help that much. They help a little bit. I don't think that Susana is going to be pegged as necessarily supporting any of Sarah Palin's positions because she accepted an endorsement, any more than Diana would be pegged as being some kind of flaming liberal if she accepted money from some sort of liberal contributor. I just don't think that sticks very much. But this was during the primary, and of course Sarah Palin is a very popular figure in the Republican Party, so I can see the attraction, and of course Sarah Palin also draws a huge crowd, and so I'm sure that was actually fruitful and productive for her during the primary.
Okay, interesting stuff. Well, I want to move on to the lieutenant governor's race. Brian Colon, former state Democratic chair, will be taking on John Sanchez, a village councilman and a gubernatorial candidate. What do you make of this race?
Well, that's an interesting race. John Sanchez, of course, was the gubernatorial candidate 8 years ago when he ran against Bill Richardson. And Brian Colon, of course, is a relative newcomer. He was the party chairman of the Democratic Party. So Sanchez has actually taken a step downward in mobility in terms of the election this year. I don't know how much, I really don't know very much what he's been doing in the last few years. And I'm not sure how much the lieutenant governor's race means in terms of predicting the outcome of the governor's race. Lieutenant governors really have very little power. The real secret here is that they hold a gavel, they can break a tie. They usually don't want to break a tie because if it's that close, you're going to offend somebody. Most lieutenant governors are running for something in the future, and and they don't even want to break the tie. Other than that, they have no power. They have no vote in the legislature. They can only do as much as the governor gives them and extends them to do. So a lot of times you do have people talking about that. In the lieutenant governor's race this year, Lawrence Rael talked a lot. He is a real manager. He managed the city of Albuquerque for 12 years. He managed the Rail Runner project in its last phases, and clearly highly qualified for that.
And it was a hotly contested race on the Democratic side. I mean, there were 5 candidates and a number of very well organized, financed campaigns there.
Very hotly contested, yeah. He was, I think, clearly the most qualified in the sense that he has managerial experience in front of him. Didn't make that much difference to the public. He came in second. And regardless, I think there was just this perception that whether he could manage what he wanted to manage or not really depended exclusively on how much trust and reliance Diana Dennis would have were she to be elected. And so I think that's the case with on both sides. What they end up doing is really a function of what the governor wants them to do. And if the past is the experience, most governors would just as soon not have a very high profile for the lieutenant governor because it just simply interferes with them being at center stage.
I want to get your sense of how you think the general mood of voters, which might be described generally as angry, often anti-incumbent in some cases, some races we've already seen, and how this might affect New Mexico. I mean, this is really, if you think about it, an interesting time. We saw in the primary as well recently, where in Nevada, a Tea Party candidate coming out of nowhere to win the Republican nomination for Senate, Sharon Angle, someone who essentially wants to completely change the role of the federal government, eliminate Social Security and Medicare for younger workers, eliminate the Department of Education. I mean, we're talking about things that we don't normally hear about in someone running for U.S. Senate. I mean, occasionally we hear about these in House races around the country, these kind of ideas that are very much, totally different from our current form of federal government departments and taxation. What is this going to mean for New Mexico, do you think?
There's anger all over the place. It's not just with the Tea Party. There's generalized anger. The problem with dealing with the anger is that it stems from very different sources. In other words, people are angry for different reasons. Liberals are angry because they expected Obama to show more leadership on issues that they care about. 2 years later, we still have 2 wars. We've bailed out the banks. We have high unemployment. And liberals are unhappy because they don't think Obama went left enough. On the other hand, conservatives are angry because they think he went too far. And conservatives are angry not only because he went too far, but because they're angry because Republicans went too far, in their opinion, when they bailed out these banks for $1 trillion worth, and then they had this stimulus package, and then they keep talking about deficit spending. So anybody who's a deficit spending hawk and would like to hold it down is angry both at the Republican Party and at the Democratic Party. They're just angry at the world. On the other hand, there's a bunch of liberals that are out there angry because they felt like Obama promised to get out of these wars, promised to do a number of things, and then just simply didn't deliver, whether it was because it's pragmatically impossible because he doesn't have the 60 votes or whatever the reason. They're still angry. So you have generalized anger, but from different sources of that anger.
Which essentially makes, I'm assuming, your conclusion, things very unpredictable, and it opens up things for independence.
In New Mexico, there's also anger, but there's a different source of anger there. Not only is there the anger at the national level, liberals being angry for one reason, conservatives for another reason, but in New Mexico, there's also, I think, an anger that people feel that in the last few years, corruption got out of hand. in the state of New Mexico, and that their taxpayer money has not been used wisely. And there's all kinds of examples of that. The State Investment Council made some very, very bad investments, and then all of the scandal around the way in which those investments were made and the contracts that were given out to make those investments. People are angry about that, very palpable, and I expect that that anger will show up in the gubernatorial races this year, and possibly in some of the congressional races as well.
And let's talk about the congressional race locally. Incumbent Harry Teague taking on the man who used to hold this seat, Republican Steve Pearce.
That is likely to be, I think, a campaign that goes to the wire. They've both been incumbents, so they are both fairly well known at this point, and so they don't have to establish name identification or who they are. I think their personas are reasonably well known. And the Southern Congressional District tends to be conservative, and so liberals are kind of unhappy with Teague because in many cases he's been on the conservative side. He voted against health care, for example. So it's unclear whether liberals are going to abandon him or the base is going to not be as enthusiastic for him.
And as you know, there's a huge debate about that as to whether or not that will eventually hurt Harry Teague in the general election. What do you think?
Well, it's unclear at this time. Where are liberals going to go? Are they going to vote for Pearce? Because we know his voting record was very, very conservative, down the line pretty much with George Bush.
Well, and of course he's criticized Harry Teague for voting for the energy bill.
The cap and trade.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's going to be it's going to be a wild race, because Teague will probably be arguing as a Democrat. Democrats are likely to hold on to the House of Representatives and the Senate. So as a Democrat, he might be able to get more because he knows the leadership more over there. On the other hand, the district is a little bit more conservative maybe, and Pearce is going to be arguing, well, but I'm the conservative candidate, and I'll vote more along the lines that you would like me to vote than Harry Teague. And which one of those two ends up is anybody's guess at this point. I think it's going to be a hard-fought race, and I think the public is very open-minded right now. I don't think anybody's really made up their mind specifically as to how they're going to vote on that race.
But just to clarify, regardless of what happens in New Mexico, you believe that in the end, in November, the Democrats will still hold both the House and the Senate?
Right. I think the prediction in the House is that Democrats will lose maybe 20 seats. There'll still be a comfortable margin in the House. Nancy Pelosi's seat will probably still be safe. And in the Senate, the same way. I mean, they won't have any 60 votes, but they'll certainly have at least 52, 53, 54 votes. So they'll be able to pass legislation, but without the 60 vote ability to really get things done.
All right. Dr. Garcia, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be here.
Good to have you here. Finally on Newsmakers, Carlos Correa takes us to a unique summer camp in Alamogordo.
This summer, the Museum of Space History will boldly take area young people where they've never been before. It's a demonstration Joshua House can't wait to show off.
It shows how the air actually works.
House is part of New Mexico's Space Academy at the Museum of Space History, where hundreds of students gather for its annual summer camp.
So many science demonstrations that I've seen growing up in school, they're real neat, but you can't do them on your own. And I think it's fun when you can show them how easy it actually is.
During the camp, students will embark in space adventures without ever leaving the solar system.
And it's actually the most popular thing that we have here. We draw up to 600 to 800 students every single year who have a wonderful time at space camp. Many of them spend the night and they engage in space adventures, activities, projects, overnight field trips. They stay here and they totally get immersed in an environment of education and entertainment.
This year, the camp is introducing additional summer programs for students, including a magic camp and one solely devoted to dinosaurs.
We understand that each child learns a different way, and we're trying to implement each different learning style through different types of activities.
Camp leaders hope students will be able to take away a little bit of something from each activity within the camp.
With all the different ways that we're presenting the information, I think one of the best things is that they're going to remember this stuff in the future. And when they go over these things in class, they're going to remember, oh, we learned about this in camp.
And for the first time this summer, the space camp will travel out of Alamogordo and into Mesilla. For KRWG, I'm Carlos Correa.
Thanks, Carlos. That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Morning edition comes your way from 5 to 9, weekend edition 8 to 10, and All Things Considered every afternoon at 4. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.